Okay, here's what I need you to do. Find a copy of The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez, turn it over, and at the bottom, you'll find a Kirkus review that says, "The best of what science fiction can be." That is a bold statement. Science fiction is a lot of different things, and it means a lot of different things to different people. And yet, given that fact, they're still kind of right. The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez is a perfect work of science fiction. This novel has been hyped to hell over the past few years since it was first published. It is a remarkable debut novel, and I think it deserves all the hype and praise that it's gotten. The Vanished Birds really is the best of what science fiction can be. I'm not saying it's the greatest sci-fi novel of all time, that's a tall order, but it takes every single thing that sci-fi does well, fuses all of it together, and creates something bold, bright, meaningful, beautiful. It's honestly staggering, so let's talk about it. The Vanished Birds is set far into the future, 1,000 years after the Earth became uninhabitable and we had to flee to the stars. That is not an original idea for science fiction, it's been done before, but that's the thing about this book is it takes a lot of established ideas, it takes a lot of political and economic, social topics, blends them all together into something gorgeous. So that's where we begin. Well, not actually. Where we begin is a little more interesting. The chapters of this book vary in size enormously, with the shortest chapters being maybe 3 or 4 pages and the longest being 50 plus pages. And the first chapter of this novel almost reads like a short story or even a novella. It is 50 pages long, roughly, and it tells the story of a man who, after that first chapter, will never be seen again. This is his story. That man's name is Ceda, and we follow his life from his birth until he reaches old age. Ceda lives in a farming village. It's implied that his entire planet is one massive farming community that supplies crops to all the different planets and space stations that humanity has set up and colonized around the galaxy. And this is one of many planets that does that sustains everyone else. And when Ceda is a young boy, a small cargo ship arrives to gather up all of the crops and transport them out to the rest of human civilization amongst the stars. And the captain of that ship is a young woman. They're having a kind of festival and she's sat playing a flute. Ceda is mesmerized by her flute playing and by her as a beautiful young woman, but he's just a boy. And she and her ship only visit every 12 years. She is our true protagonist. We know this from the blurb. Her ship uses some kind of faster than light or wormhole technology to travel very quickly between these different planets, but because of wibbly wobbly timey-wiminess, she doesn't age while she's in one of these kind of wormhole transport subspace portal thingies, and everyone else does. Time is different for her. So while she comes back every 12 years but has only aged a few weeks or months, Ceda is always 12 years older. Once he hits adulthood, the two of them have a night of passion, but then he gets married, and when she comes back 12 years later, he secretly has another night of passion with her. He looks forward to it. It kind of keeps him going. Every 12 years, he has one night with this woman. By the time he's in his 50s and she's now 20 years younger than him, things are different. And then something falls from the sky. A meteor crashes into the ground near where Ceda lives. And in that crater is a boy. Just a boy. He's a little battered and bruised, but he's alive. Ceda and his community, they look after him, fix him up. He's mute. They don't know where he's come from and how any of this is possible. And when the transport ship arrives, Ceda gives the boy to our protagonist, and she takes him off to one of the main space stations. And from here we follow our main protagonist, Nia, and a boy who for a while is nameless. Then we flash back to some time not too far into the future from now, where global warming is ravaging the planet, we are adapting but not quickly enough, and there is a Japanese woman called Fumiko Nakajima. She's an engineering genius. She has fallen in love with a young woman, but because of her genius, Nakajima has to go off-world eventually. She, almost single-handedly, is designing these incredible space stations that resemble birds. And she's going to be in charge of the actual creation of these things. With these space stations, we can flee our planet, a planet we destroyed. We ravaged it, we sucked the life out of it, and now we're going to flee. She leaves her lover behind. This haunts her forever, and she goes on to save humanity. But most of this story takes place 1,000 years after all of this. And Fumiko Nakajima is still alive because fairly regularly she puts herself into what they call cold sleep, a suspended animation that allows her to wake up, see what's going on, catch up with things, make a few commands because she's basically the head of everything now. And one thing she wants is this boy. The reasons are staggering and I'm not going to tell you. She wants him for something. I mean, he fell from the stars. He can't talk. We don't know who or what he is and what he can do and how any of this is possible, and obviously she's interested. And eventually the main story starts when Nakajima gives Nia a task to take this boy far away into the fringes of human civilization, of established colonized human space, and keep him in the distant wastelands of space for as long as is needed for something to happen. I can't tell you any more without spoiling things, and I know it probably feels like I've spoiled a lot, but a lot happens in the very early chapters. But from here, I can't talk about anything. I can't talk about the boy, I can't talk about what he is, what he represents. I can't talk about Nia and her past. Obviously, we know we're going to learn more and more about her. She is our eyes and ears for much of this story. I've told you a little bit about Nakajima's past, but there's more, and there's a lot more about her present and about this society. There's a lot to discover, and it is a wonderful, fascinating journey, both in terms of philosophy and politics and in terms of it being a literal journey that they go on. There is one thing I want to hint at though, and it's because I had a feeling. I don't know how this is possible. It's a really curious thing. While I was reading The Vanished Birds, I was reading the chapter early on of Nakajima's history, her life on Earth, and the fact that we were eventually going to escape to the stars. And I had this thought while I was reading. Nothing had led to this point. Nothing in the story, nothing in the dialogue had encouraged this thought that popped into my head, but I had it anyway. And this thought was, it feels as though our evolution is leading to this point. Kind of in a 2001 A Space Odyssey way, where if you've read the novel, it's a little bit more clear. These obelisks were put on Earth for humanity to find when we were ready to find them, and they would help us evolve beyond our human forms and take us off into the stars. This book has a similar feeling where I thought at one point, wow, it's almost as if Earth is a starting point, but our real destiny, our future is in the stars. Eventually, this was what we were always leading towards. Our evolutionary path was taking us into space. I had that thought and then I was like, well, maybe that's just me being optimistic. I mean, we're still ravaging the most beautiful place. The only place we know, a place of absolute beauty and a lot of incredible life. A miracle of a place. We're going to ravage it just so we can take off and live in big metal structures in a void that we can't survive in. Yeah? That was the thought I had. It's kind of fascinating because the book starts to take you in that direction. I had this random thought, 50 pages later, the book is telling me that's where we're going with this. And I was fascinated, absolutely captivated. The Vanished Birds is so beautiful. And it's a perfect work of science fiction because it does everything right. Everything that sci-fi can do, everything that sci-fi can be as a vehicle for political and philosophical debate, or at least conversation, as something that can be allegorical, and as something that can simply be a fantastical and even escapist journey through the stars, through time and space. It does all of that. And something that's worth mentioning is I have glossed over a lot of the science here because this is not hard sci-fi. It's a book that just asks you to believe it, kind of like Doctor Who. The sonic screwdriver just works because it works, okay? These subspace tunnels that allow for FTL travel, they just work, okay? Just don't worry about it. There's no scientist with a piece of paper putting a pencil through it, the whole Event Horizon shtick. You don't get that. Things happen, things work. Things were invented or discovered, and now they work. Just go with it. And the same is kind of the case with this boy. There's something he can do. There's something he is. You'll find out. Just go with it. It's one of those books that doesn't offer you explanations and asks that you don't need them. And you don't. In that way, it is fantastical science fiction. Again, kind of like Doctor Who or like Star Trek. Things just work, and that's okay. But it's also a novel that is absolutely full of heart. These characters are interesting. They are good. They are kind. They are flawed. They are secretive. They do bad things. They do good things. They are very, very tangible and three-dimensional and layered, dynamic things. I grew to love these people. I grew quite addicted to Nia as a character, as a protagonist. And it's also a book that breaks a few conventions. We establish early on Nia and her crew in her ship, but once the main story starts, half the crew just bail and are replaced by new people. That is weird. That is breaking narrative structures. You build a rapport with these characters as a reader, and then they are flushed away and replaced by new people that you then have to get to know all over again. Also, there is an entire segment halfway through this book, a whole really long chapter, again, maybe 50 pages long, that is the diary of a new character on board the ship. And it's an hilarious diary because he's very, very pompous and he's trying to write something literary, and you have to read that literary thing, which is about these characters that you're very invested in. It was such a quirky and really, really fun thing. The book is not too long, a decent enough length, and it does things with its narrative to keep you invested. It has an ADHD feel where just as you're kind of getting bored by something, the dynamic shifts, the way it's written shifts, the perspective shifts, the protagonist changes, and that keeps you interested and keeps you invested. Like I said, it opens with a short story about a guy who isn't in it again. Then we get a backstory set on Earth. Then we're back in the present. My camera battery just died and broke my train of thought, and now I don't know what I was saying, but I think you get it. Very good book. Does everything that science fiction should do and somehow blends it all together into something masterful with a narrative that works so gorgeously. This is one of those books that every kind of sci-fi fan can enjoy without watering down the themes and the elements and the tropes and the ideas, still presenting something that is genuinely fascinating and thought-provoking without alienating anyone from the science fiction audience. How do you pull that off? Especially with a debut novel. Well, Simon Jimenez has, and I am in awe. This really is a perfect piece of science fiction. If you're a sci-fi fan, well, you've probably already read it. This book is massive. But in case you haven't, please do. And subscribe for books.